Why distance is misread as authority. Distance functions as a sorting cue. When someone is less reachable, slower to respond, or physically apart, observers infer higher rank, greater choice, and lower dependence. The human system uses absence as a proxy for control. Limited access looks intentional, because randomness does not repeat with the same shape. Repetition of unavailability signals pattern, and pattern is read as hierarchy. This happens even when the distance comes from constraints, not position. It persists because people prefer a stable explanation over an uncertain one. The pattern forms quickly in environments with limited information and high coordination costs. In groups, someone who speaks less or later is treated as a terminal link in the chain. Others wait for signals that may not come, and the waiting itself is read as proof that the person is important. When the person enters late, the room or the channel is already framed around them. People protect their time by pre-filtering, which reinforces the idea that their time is scarce and thus valuable. That scarcity is then taken to confirm authority. The cycle repeats with each interaction, because it is easier to preserve a model than adjust it. Distance simplifies signal traffic. With fewer messages to interpret, each response is amplified in meaning. A short acknowledgement is treated as sanction. A delay becomes a veto without stating one. A glance away becomes a rejection. When a person does not attend the smaller discussions, any comment they eventually make looks like a decision, even if it is only an opinion. Silence becomes content in itself, and others supply the missing lines. Status is guessed wrong, and trust erodes. The distant person experiences confirmation. People defer. Questions get pushed through intermediaries. Challenges are rare, not necessarily because agreement is high, but because access is low. From the inside, this appears efficient. Less time in minor discussions means more time for larger matters. Gatekeeping looks like protection of focus. The person sees fewer interruptions and assumes fewer problems. Distance also reduces visible error. When engaged rarely, mistakes are fewer by exposure, not necessarily by judgment. This creates a skew. Low contact means fewer opportunities to misstep publicly, which strengthens the illusion of sound judgment. Observers fill the gaps with assumed competence. The distant person accepts this picture because discordant details do not reach them. Delayed or diluted feedback never has the same force as immediate, direct response. Context is lost and errors scale unnoticed. Crowds misread reserve as discretion and scarcity as demand. They use cost as a stand-in for quality. If it is hard to reach someone, the mind treats the access as valuable even before any value is demonstrated. In a queue, the shift toward reverence happens quietly. People treat the queue as a judgment. The wait becomes a story about rank. Even if the distant person did nothing to cultivate it, the configuration suggests a ladder. Inside the pattern, small favors become major concessions. A brief meeting becomes a gift. A reply becomes a signal to many, not just a response to one. This inflates each move beyond its intended scope. The person believes they are setting boundaries. Others think they are setting standards. The mismatch produces a set of side effects that feel justified to both sides for different reasons. Neither party sees the full mechanism, only the piece nearest to them. Ambiguity helps the pattern survive. When someone says less, their words attract more weight than they can hold. People edit their own messages to match the perceived tone. This self-editing makes the distant person appear more consistent than they are. Consistency is then used to bolster the inference of authority. The person concludes that they are clear. In reality, there is less data to contradict a simple model, so the model persists. Distance detaches the person from the feel of time in the group. They move through fewer cycles, so they feel less volatility. Others move around them at full speed. Those others update constantly, but the distant person experiences a smoother line. That smooth line presents as stability, which looks like strength. The team provides the stability by withholding noise. The credit falls to the figure who is least exposed to oscillation. Access shrinks and credibility decays in silence. From the outside, repeated distance looks chosen. From the inside, it looks necessary. The person decides that not all requests deserve a response, and then the pattern treats non-response as superior judgment. With each skipped small matter, they conserve time while exporting confusion. This exported confusion is managed by peers, not by them. As peers take on the burden, their own signals become more legible to each other and less legible to the distant person. The network reorganizes contact without announcing it. Distance becomes a role. It defines the channel structure, the meeting seat, the speaking order, and the story people tell about what matters. People request less, not knowing if absence means refusal or busyness. They approach through proxies, who answer in generalities. The person hears only those generalities and assumes adequate coverage. Any misreading by the proxies is invisible until it is embedded in outcomes. By that point, attribution is messy. Responsibility is spread, but the image at the center remains simple. Patterns that reduce friction are favored in groups. Avoiding friction with the distant person lowers risk for everyone else. So others minimize direct confrontation and build routines that need fewer approvals. The distant person experiences this as maturity. The group experiences it as learned workarounds. Each side sees competence in the other's behavior and confirms their own frame. There is no shared check because the pattern protects itself from checks. Distance also looks like confidence because it removes displays of need. Not asking appears strong. Not clarifying appears decisive. In meetings, a brief nod is enough to close a topic because people want it to be closed. They designed the situation to close things quickly because waiting is costly. When someone signals that they are not waiting, others accept their conclusion as final. The appearance of calm is a function of reduced input, not necessarily increased control. As the pattern settles, it recruits language to defend itself. Words like focus, standards, and boundaries are used to explain why distance exists. These words are convenient because they are vague enough to fit any context and positive enough to pass without objection. The person accepts them because they confirm a self-image of discipline. Others accept them because they excuse not engaging. The result is a stable arrangement that looks deliberate and competent from a distance, and only shows its gaps when close. When the person is finally close, they are in a staged setting. People bring curated topics, pre-aligned decisions, and narrowed choices. The person decides among pre-filtered options and sees their influence reflected in the post-decision narrative, not in the building of those options. This keeps the self-conception of authority intact. It also removes exposure to the underlying constraints and trade-offs. The distance is maintained by success stories that do not record the missing steps. Time makes the pattern harder to challenge. The sunk cost of a public image pins people to their behavior. To change contact levels would admit previous misreadings. To increase availability risks lowering perceived authority. To decrease availability risks irrelevance. So the current level holds. Others do not test it because they have designed paths around it that now work. Disconfirming evidence loses energy in transit. People observing from outside the inner ring copy the surface. They reduce presence, they compress language, they respond later, they sit apart. They think they are learning authority when they are learning distance. It is indistinguishable in their view because results appear to follow. Their local environments then mirror the same inference loop. Others assume they have gained power and change behavior accordingly. As that happens, real authority fragments into patterns of access. The signal can no longer be traced to competence. Those who are unsure default toward caution. They assume a higher cost of error with a distant person than with peers. They remove spontaneity around that person, not because the person asks, but because the imagined penalty is higher. The change feels reasonable. It is self-enforcing and inefficient. It persists because nobody wants to absorb the immediate cost of a test. So the distance remains a fact, not a proposition, in the group's mind. Once the pattern is established, observers reframe the person according to how they are used, not what they claim. They become a checkpoint to bypass, not a source of clarity. Meetings are scheduled around their absence, not in expectation of insight. Documents are written for show, not for input. Courtesy remains while commitment drains. The reputation separates from the work. Influence fades while position still looks intact. Leverage reallocates quietly to those who convert ambiguity into motion. The people who answer quickly and reliably become the actual center of coordination. Gatekeepers who can get a response become more valuable than the nominal owner. Translators who explain the distant person's intent are treated as more predictive than the person themselves. The calendar, the inbox, and the hallway become the real tools of authority. The title lags behind. Others own decisions they think they lead. Respect terms change without announcement. What was once deference is now accommodation. People shape proposals to minimize the need for the distant person, not to gain their attention. Delegations are sent with pre-aligned answers. The person nods, and the nod is validated after the fact. This lowers conflict in the moment and shifts power to the group that did the work. The external image remains that the person approved the plan. The person becomes a late-stage resource, signature, sanction, and symbolic presence. Real debate happens where they are not. The tone around them is compliant and minimal. The tone away from them is direct and practical. The first tone keeps them uninformed. The second gets the job done. Over time, people use the first to protect the second. The split becomes structural. The title holds weight, not real effect. In selection moments, the change appears in patterns of who is consulted. The distant person is informed after decisions are safely locked in. They are given narrow choices that do not alter direction. Their objections are managed through delay until they expire from timing pressure. Others learn the rhythm and plan around it. The whole process runs without confrontation. The social map rewrites itself. People who invest in maintaining contact with each other gain disproportionate say. Those who manage risk in real time, not in end-stage sign-offs, become the actual references. The distant person is kept for moments that require external display. Internally, the weight shifts to whoever can move resources quickly. That person might be junior in formal terms, but senior in practical outcomes. The group follows momentum, not stated rank. Over time, the distant person's image becomes either untouchable or irrelevant. Untouchable means nobody risks bringing them into the mess. Irrelevant means nobody thinks it will matter. Both states create the same behavior: avoidance. Meetings are framed to be easy for them to approve, or they are scheduled without them and backfilled with a clean summary. The first looks respectful. The second looks efficient. Both reduce their actual leverage. Signals from them carry less risk of pushback because fewer people are listening for meaning. Responses are processed as permission slips, not as direction. If they try to reverse a settled path, the cost is visible and personal. That cost is often avoided by framing the reversal as a misunderstanding. The group treats the statement as a difference in context, not in order. The person is managed by explanation and delay. The shift is plain in outcomes, not in statements. Where their presence once caused delay, their absence becomes the path of least resistance. Teams create routines that remove dependencies. They show deference in public, but they route requests to operatives who actually decide. The brand stays attached to the distant person, but the handle is elsewhere. The gap widens with each project that concludes without them. They are told after the fact and thanked publicly. There is no incentive to change the structure. Those who once tried to get their attention learn that other channels pay faster. Loyalty migrates to the people who return investment in time. That migration does not announce itself with a break. It shows up in who gets looped in early, who drafts the first version, who is asked for a quick view. The distant person finds out later when options are already constrained. They see a narrow set of choices and think they are deciding. They are not. Budget and resource allocation follow the same pattern. Money is set aside under broad headings that the distant person can approve easily. The real shifts happen within those headings, at the discretion of those who stay close to the work. Adjustments are logged to fit the story after they are done. Reporting uses formats that compress nuance into stable charts. The person reads the charts, nods, and the system continues. Others read the nod as a stamp, not as a command. In talent moves, high performers orient toward reliability and access. They attach to managers who are present enough to remove blocks. They do not wait for the distant person to notice. They plan sideways and down, not up. The distant person inherits the narrative that they are above the details. Meanwhile, the details decide the future state. There is no collision because there is no contact. External observers are simpler. They take proximity to decisions as the measure of power. They sense who can get something done at short notice. They bypass public rank when they learn who answers a message on the same day. Over time, this inference becomes common sense in the network. It hardens into routine introductions and standard pathways. The formal map remains, but travel follows the new roads. When the distant person attempts to reassert control, response is polite and slow. People point to processes, calendars, and other constraints. They push to the next cycle. The person may escalate once, but the cost of repeated insistence is high in reputation terms. They avoid that cost by adjusting on the surface. The pattern registers this as tolerance and continues. The signal is that resistance will be episodic and manageable. If the person continues to stay apart, the reading of their distance changes by default. It stops being seen as authority and starts being seen as insulation. Rather than a mark of strength, it reads as avoidance. Rather than setting a standard, it sets a limit. Others stop expecting real input and start saying what they think the person wants to hear. That reduces variance in the room while increasing variance in the field. Forecasts improve on paper and degrade in reality. The supply of candor falls. Those with proximity to the work protect themselves by controlling what travels upward. They provide safe versions of the truth that can be approved quickly. They reserve the real details for those who will act. The person in the distance receives layers of processed information and treats the consistency as proof of stability. The further they are, the smoother it looks. The smoothness is not stability. It is filtering. Over time, the person's ability to cause a real change declines. Their statements lose teeth because they rarely follow through in the messy parts. Others know this and behave accordingly. They comply in words and continue with their plans. The pattern holds because it reduces open conflict. The cost is lag, duplication, and quiet drift away from stated strategy. The consequences appear slowly and all at once in quiet measures. Missed timing, stale offerings, thin bench strength. When it matters, the gap is visible in who people call first. It is not the distant person. It is the one who can move a schedule, write a check, or pull a team. Authority has already shifted, so the call follows. The distant person is added later for optics. Their name adds cover, but not pressure. The work finishes without them, while their story remains attached to it in the final version. At that point, no explicit confrontation is required. The system roots around the person as if they were an obstacle, even if they are not. It is not anger. It is a function. Each participant protects their own risk and time by following the paths that work. The person's distance makes them too slow to be central. Their authority continues to be cited while it fades in practice. The image stays clean. The function moves on. That is the shape of it now.